Okay, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. It's going to be a great webinar. Lots of great speakers and demos that are coming forth, focused on leveraging AI for acquisition, and really focused on the market research piece of that. We're really happy and thrilled to have participation across industry, government, and your FFRDCs and academia as well. My name is Ryan Novak. I come out of MITRE. I'm one of the outcome leads from our Acquisition Innovation Center. I have about 30 years of acquisition experience, and a former contracting officer with the Air Force back in the day. And really, the last 3 years have been focused in on how to leverage AI across the acquisition lifecycle. Everything from the market research and requirements generation phase, all the way up through solicitation, award, and even post-award, and programmatic documents as well. And I lead MITRE's Acquire portfolio, which is, you're going to hear a part from Kevin Forbes today in the demo, one of the tools that we've created for that. So really happy to be here. I also want to thank our partners, NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute, and particularly Arun, Wilson, and Sierra. They've been great partners. MITRE and ETI have been working on this topic, or these hot topics of leveraging AI and acquisition, since about 2024. And so we held our first symposium back in the fall of 24. We've partnered on several papers that have been picked up from Naval Postgraduate School, to include two this year in 26. And we've done a webinar on requirements last year. We're doing this webinar, and we're actually looking at doing another symposium in the fall. So lots of great momentum on this topic, trying to bring the community together. So appreciate that partnership with ETI. From my perspective, real quick, what is the pain point for market research? Again, from my perspective, and I think you're going to hear a lot of different perspectives. I think one of them is ultimately, from the market research phase, what is the value proposition, right? We tend to get terabytes of information during the acquisition process. And from the government side, it's very difficult to sift through that data that our industry partners share with us, and then make sense of it or assess it in a quick and useful way, right? We, as humans, we tend to think linearly. And I think AI can bring a lot of value from a holistic perspective and a speed perspective. And we're going to hear some of demos featuring some of those capabilities later today. I think at the end of the day, what is market research supposed to do, not just for industry, but for government as a whole? It's supposed to do, from my perspective, again, a former CO or KO, if you will, we're supposed to learn from our industry partners. It's supposed to help us influence our acquisition strategy, our contracting approach. How can we incentivize our industry partners better? It's supposed to help us shape our requirements. What is the art of the possible out there? Who's doing what? Who has what capabilities? What are the partnerships that are out there? And it's supposed to illuminate the market as a whole, right? Can small businesses fulfill this requirement? Where are the new entrants for this capability? Are there any non-traditional vendors? And it's also supposed to reveal innovation pathways. What type of innovative approaches or capabilities or solutions are out there? So it does a lot. And so from an industry perspective and from a government perspective, it's an extremely valuable step. From my perspective, I think AI can make it even more useful. I'll give you a real quick example. Even from a request for information perspective, we did what's called a retrospective once. And so we received somewhere around 50 RFI responses from industry. We did that from a human perspective, where we had 3 people working for 9 days, 8 hours a day, just to sift the data to get it into some type of usable format, right? Before we did any assessment. So we spent 9 days sifting through material. Not hard, but takes time. We did a retrospective using an AI tool, and it took an hour. Right. And so now we can use that time. And this is where I think the benefit of AI is. Instead of spending 9 days sifting through data, not a lot of value add, and spending 2 hours doing an assessment, we flip that on its head using AI, right? We let AI do that administrative, not hard, but time consuming thing. And now we can spend maybe not 2 hours, maybe we can spend a day assessing the data, making better information rich decisions. So hopefully that hits home a little bit. So for today, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see demos in part one, which will be really cool. I think we have 4 for you. And then we're going to have a roundtable with some really smart people talking about best practices, lessons learned, so on and so forth, and giving their views. So my take is please engage throughout. There's a chat window in there. If you have questions, ask them in there. We might not get to all of them, but we will follow up with you. If you have a specific question for someone, make sure you point it to that person. Drop questions, drop pointers in the chat. This is a community here, and we're all here to learn from each other. We're glad you're here. Thank you again for coming. And again, this is the second seminar in the series. We're looking at doing maybe another seminar and definitely a symposium in the fall from a larger AI perspective. So thank you. Without further ado, I will pass you on to my colleague, Adam Buffard.
Okay. All right. So as Ryan said, we're going to have 4 demos. We have 4 good demos presentations coming up. We're going to do about 10 minutes apiece for the demos presentations, and then we'll take 1 question from the chat. That doesn't limit you guys putting questions in the chat, but please, as we're going through it, if you have any questions for the presenter, let us know. First up, we have Tim Otto. He's currently serves as North AI's Chief Growth Officer. North AI is an AI-first defense tech organization. It was launched in 2018. It's been working with OUSD R&E for 5+ years now. He's going to showcase their intelligence platform for rapid on-demand and real-time assessment of emerging defense technologies. So, Tim, over to you.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate the introduction. Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for the setup. I thought that was a good introduction of kind of what I'm planning to cover today. So, yeah, as Adam mentioned, let me pull up our dashboard and take you through the demo. Usually our demos lasting about an hour long when we take clients and prospects through. So try to fit this into 10 minutes. But I think the main thing I want to come across is that AI is definitely helping us kind of sift through all kinds of data and being able to unpack super complex dense documents, PDFs, all kinds of data that's out there. And so through kind of like this experience of basically going through the exercise with the Pentagon and understanding their needs. We had this request maybe 4 or 5 years ago to kind of understand what's happening across the RDT&E spending. And so what we're able to do is actually unpack that data and then use a huge innovation data set that we have curated to actually give us signals to understanding exactly what are the patterns, where things are moving, and make sense of super complex data that's out there. And so what we did is we built a dashboard, super simple to use, very intuitive, but it's able to kind of direct us of exactly where the technology focus is and what's kind of growing, what's kind of being funded, what's important to the Department of Defense. And so I can do simple things like I can on our dashboard I can type in and just filter by specific agency. I can understand maybe what's focused in directed energy. I can start to look at different budget line activities and just kind of, get an idea, a lay of the land of exactly what's happening, across, that specific pattern if I want. The other thing I can do is that, when you have these really, robust, information rich type documents, such as the JBooks, what you might want to do is, just actually put some type of search across it. And so, building a vectorized search over top of it, we can explicitly type in assured PNT as an example, but we can find the related technologies across that landscape by doing different tagging and, being able to understand exactly what those technologies are. So easy to do this, easy to understand. Maybe I'm focused on kind of the high funding side of things. So I can look, there's, 10 technologies within that group. I can go down a little bit further, kind of understand maturity of technology, the makeup there, also look at kind of the spending across different patterns, and then also do some forecasting too. So we have, the fiscal year 2026, but then we can do our projections out into the future. If I want to look at kind of the growth areas, I can look at the growth areas by technology. And so being able to filter these, I can start zeroing in on a specific technology that I might be interested and try to make sense of this. Trying to, shift through all these PDFs and understand what's happening. It's not the easiest way to kind of filter and get to exactly what I want. But we use our huge innovation data set to actually provide in scoring, provide context, and actually build in the numbers that we want to in terms of understanding this type of technology. And some of these are so esoteric that it's very difficult to understand, exactly what that technology is, try to understand, what are the patterns and what's kind of related. So we can do some scoring here to make, life simple and kind of do some of the scoring to pull the technologies that we want up. We can add in descriptions. We can also add in kind of the dual use nature of those applications. But the other pattern is that we might want to pull this up a little bit. Maybe we want to look at the program level, and maybe we want to actually use AI a little bit to extract kind of the relevant text across those. And so, we use AI on the back end, but then we also pull it to the front end to make it easy and simple to use. So if I pull in here, maybe, it's a little bit easier. I can pull up the full screen here just to give a better description and picture. But we can showcase kind of where the program element is. And then we can also go into the programs piece, and we can start to look at the different technologies and zero in on exactly the technology we want to investigate, or we want to start to understand the activity around that type of technology. And as I mentioned before, we have a technology intelligence side of our platform. And so from that side, what we can do is we can go in and we can actually query that technology to create a subset or a drill down of that technology. And so, there's not, usually when you're dealing with AI systems, you're querying into it, you're starting to, build something around it and try and get to the actual outcomes that you're looking for. So I'm going to put this into a query, and we have built this huge innovation data set on the back end. And what this will do is it'll explain to you kind of like what the process is. But what we have found in the past is that we have this dialogue that goes back and forth, and the plan to wait around for a report or wait around for months on end to finally get exactly what I want. It just doesn't have to be that way any longer. We can now put the keys in the program analyst or into the the manager's hands to be able to create that that on-demand type of experience. And so when we had this working in the Pentagon, we used to have this exchange back and forth of scoping out a project. What does that project look like? What are the parameters? How does that and so that type of dialogue that has to happen back and forth extends the possibility of that report or that information not getting in the hands of where it needs to be. And so we can create that type of experience by putting this into the hands of the user. And so as we kind of like get this through, you'll kind of see that we're the processing capability that's actually happening to be able to sift through these 200 million documents is extremely powerful. It really does cut out that experience, and you can have this type of experience back and forth in terms of like is this the right report? Is this the right data that you should be looking at? Should you expand upon it? Should you decrease it? Should you open it up? And so usually, as we're kind of like going through these aggregations, we're building this out, we're getting the clusters, that experience just was not available, in the past. The acceleration of how we've been able to unpack this and create something that's a bit unique. You don't necessarily get an end result where it's not what you were looking for. The idea to actually create that in a customized way or a customized view is really what we've been striving to really push the envelope on, is really to get to that point and to really be able to deliver that experience, to any client. So what I did is I took that data set, from our budget view, and now I've created a data set that's really focused on, this high altitude platform payloads for PNT, right? So I can do a couple things here. I can look at the data overview. I can kind of say, what does this data look like? What is the makeup? Look at the clusters, kind of look at what the clusters are, and kind of look at, see if they're within the domain that I'm looking for. And I want to actually do that market research on. I can use, AI. I can use our agents in terms of like running market analysis, trend analysis, and running short reports on this. I can also look at aggregations and look at the makeup and kind of look at, those types of like companies, countries, research organizations. Or what I can also do is I can create short reports in the format that I'm looking for. So, quad charts are very familiar within the DoD, military space. And so maybe I want to just look at, maybe, a couple of different quad charts and actually produce those, to pass up the line and start to create that dialogue. And so, I think that the idea, about writing these reports, getting the storytelling right, and having that ability to do this, in real time is really where AI is going to help us the most, because we need that information yesterday. We don't need it today, and you can have it formatted. We can change any type of format. We can deliver that in any type of format, and we can also contextualize it too. So, the way we've envisioned our quad charts is that we have a short version. We also have a long version. And so these different versions that we can pull up and deliver back, to anybody that's like investigating specific technologies across the defense industrial base, they can do this very quickly. So I won't kind of like hinder on the quad chart. We'll let that finish up. But the end result is actually that we want to deliver a super customizable technology deep dive or landscape analysis to the user. And so we can do this by creating a report. You submit the report to us. Actually, when we started to deliver these would take a couple days to deliver. But in our new platform, which we're just launching, you can actually get to these reports immediately. And so I can take the same, tech vector or technology of interest that I'm focused on, and now I can actually create a super deep dive report. And I'll start right on the data overview section. So in the data overview section, I can pull up kind of the same type of like experience. I can kind of start understanding what's in it, what's the makeup of what we've produced in there. I can see some of these aggregations as well. I can look at topics. We can tag these topics or these clusters and kind of get an idea of what's happening within those topics. I can look at the country aggregations as well, so I can understand in this high altitude platform payloads for PNT. I can look at who are the leaders in there. We have some nice visualizations of what's going on. I can do a deep dive into the documents, the growth counts. I can look at the different metrics and see where the U.S. is actually, standing within these areas. But what we also produce, what I wanted to mention is that we have these.
We do a question real quick. We have a question from the audience that I want to get out.
Sure. Yeah.
Got time here. How would you use the data-rich environment to assess technology readiness level or manufacturing readiness level of specific technology areas?
Yep. So we actually have both. We have technology readiness level actually in our system in the budget dashboard. Actually, in most situations, actually the information that's provided in the JBooks, there's only about 15% that actually have that TRL level there. But what we do is we do some text-based analysis into our innovation data set. And then we will also look at kind of the budget line activity, and we can apply that TRL level into the actual metric that we are including in there, and so we can apply the TRL levels when it's not readily available.
Awesome. Appreciate the presentation, the demo here. I think we'll have, Wilson, is it correct? We'll have contact information and everything for folks that want to reach out and get more information on North AI or any of the other demos that we have. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'll be correct.
Okay. All right, we will move to the next. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. Okay, next up we have Nick Shalon. He's the founder of Ask Sage, and he's also dual-hatted as the CTO of Big Bear AI. He is formerly the Air Force's first chief software officer. He was responsible for establishing force-wide DevSecOps capabilities and best practices. For you not familiar with Ask Sage, it's a secure multimodal generative AI platform designed for the government. So Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Adam. And thanks everybody for being here. Very excited to be able to share with you what we've been working on, particularly in the acquisition landscape. Started back in 2023. That was probably one of the first achievement that we've done with the company, partnering with the Space Force and the US Army in the Pentagon, first at CUI level, and then secret and top secret deployments as well. I wanted to give you a quick rundown. Ask Sage is so vast. We're not going to be able to do it justice today in a few minutes, but I wanted to give you kind of the key aspect of what we built and also why it matters. I think people need to realize kind of the speed and velocity of all these models coming out between OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and Meta and others to innovate across the industry, and also the tools that help you build agents and do it in a way that is agnostic to a cloud provider or maybe a large language model. So you're not getting locked into one solution. I think it's so essential to have access to all best of breed capabilities in one unified platform with the same billing and tracking and visibility of what's going on. So we built Ask Sage to be just that. We can run from a backpack all the way to the edge and classify clouds, and be able to connect to any model, both open source and also all the frontier models today, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic or Google or XAI or whatever. And we enable teams to train the data and be able to do that without needing any help, and be able to do it once and be able to then tap any model. So that's enabling teams to try different agents and see what sticks and see what works best, whether it's for market research with web capabilities, whether it's completely air-gapped on the high side to analyze documents, PDF, Excel, you name it. We have built kind of all the integrations to be able to do that, connect to SharePoint, connect to all the tools that they may need with API access or whatever capability within the department. And so I think between the market research capability and deep agent research, but also the kind of the basic chatbot model, which enables you to obviously connect to any model. But we also have the auto mode, so you can just let it pick for you what model is best to generate a PowerPoint or an Excel analysis or a graph or chart or whatever it is you're working on, or just summarizing and researching the web with our deep agent. So we have built this deep agent here and web search capability, so you can use that to effectively go and do research. Of course, the department has deployed now Ask Sage in an unlimited fashion, so everybody can get access to Ask Sage. If you don't have access today and you're on Nipper or Sipper, you can shoot us an email at support@asksage.ai, and it's free, and we can give you access so you can use it at no cost. And of course, we built a lot of personas and integrations to different things, including the ability to have pre-made personas around the contracting world, whether it's a researcher type persona or more legal/compliance persona. And of course, you can create your own personas as well, and you can ingest your documents securely, with all the markings that you need to be able to control who has access to the documents and when. And so you have a very precise control of access to your colleagues, so they effectively have access to what they need and not what they should not be able to see. With that, of course, we have kind of the traditional UI style where you can attach files and do speech to text, text to speech, so you can do a transcription of your meetings. You can do, PowerPoints or Excel or, PDF analysis or whatever it is you're trying to do. And then, of course, we also built an agent builder where you can build step-by-step processes. So, the Army in the acquisition landscape has hundreds of plugins and agents that they built to automate tasks, whether it's a market research task or more on the procurement side, IDIQ creation, drafting, source justification documents, and so on. They can also connect it to Power Automate and their Microsoft 365 environment to be able to pull from SharePoint or whatever. And of course, the agent, you can build your own, you can build decision trees, and you can build conditions to be met and research to be performed by the AI to extract insight, summarize, create any kind of reports and any kind of template as well. So that's obviously pretty powerful there. And then we created a whole product suite called In a Box. And In a Box has a few boxes, as we call them. We have the cyber ATO automation box, which to me is still part of the acquisition process, because if you buy something rapidly and then you have a 12 months bottleneck to get accredited, that defeat the point. And so we built acquisition in a box where teams can effectively use the capability to create their own package, and they can, of course, generate the entire ATO package nightmare. That's how we got accredited with AssAge back in 2023 in a few months. It took 2 weeks to generate the package, 1 week to generate it, 1 week to read it, 96% accuracy, $2,500. So kind of a game changer, and we made it a product that both the government and companies can use to go through the ATO nightmare. And then, of course, we have an acquisition box, and we partnered, both with the CIA, the IC, and the DoD to kind of create, pre-made templates, but they can also create their own templates as well. So whether it's on the requirement side, assessing feasibility, comparing market research and state of the art to see where some of the fields being researched are standing and what's happening in industry with internet facing web search, all the way to closed search in DoD databases as well. So you can do both, and then of course all the way to the acquisition strategy, whether it's contract type selection, ROM, social justification, social versus competitive, and all the way to drafting RFPs, RFIs, scope of work, and decision documents. And so what's powerful there is the team can create their own template, and the bot is able to follow the same layout and fill sections and tables and kind of pre-populate templates. Still always helpful to have the human obviously check that everything is right, but we have a 98% accuracy, something like that. So when it comes to contracts drafting, when it comes to analysis and detailed reporting, they can automate the templates and then save a whole bunch of time, of course, aggregating, consolidating the data. Now, this even helps when it comes to drafting strategy or assessing ideas and comparing with what's already happening in the department. We can connect to sam.gov or whatever source documentation to compare what's already happening maybe in the space, or maybe you want to take a look at who else is working on a problem across an agency or across the US government. So you can do that research, whether it's internet facing and pulling from the entire web, or it's just pulling from specific sources like sam.gov or whatever. So that's kind of the foundation of AssAge. We realize the landscape is moving so fast with agents and ability to create automation. And there's a new piece of software that came out, a few weeks back with OpenClaw, that's open source and taking the internet by a storm. A lot of people concerned, with security and also with what kind of access you can give it, which can go very badly and delete all your files and whatnot. And so, these agents are kind of changing the way we can interact and just drop files and do research and analyze things and kind of do multitask complex processes by itself without having to do any kind of step-by-step guidance. And so it's really able to automate half of full day work loads and workflow. And so we felt OpenClaw is too powerful not to be used in the government. And so we thought building a kind of a hardened secure version of it is essential. And so we did that with OpenClaw as a service. And so we just launched this week the new OAS.com offering where teams can spin up a dedicated OpenClaw offering and be able to use it to build agents with the security and the proper guardrails to detect malicious code and prompt injections and a bunch of different things and limit what they can do. And of course, it's not running on your device, so it's able to do it securely and not impact your workload. So I'm pause here and see maybe if we have any questions.
We don't have any questions in the chat. Are there any questions from the audience for Nick in regards to his presentation and demo? All right. Appreciate it, Nick. Thanks very much for your demonstration. If there are any questions, again, post them in the chat.
It looks like there's two questions in the chat.
Oh, mine only shows one.
There's one in the chat and one in the Q&A box.
Oh, it's in the chat box. I got you. All right, I'm in the Q&A. Joel's we answered before, so let me pull up the chat box.
Oh, I see the question.
Okay, here we go. From the information protection lens, what defensive preventative measures are baked into your model, and how is the marking distribution dissemination handled?
So we support pretty much every model there is. So each model is going through a very stringent accreditation government process already. So we don't reassess the models themselves. But what we do is add the guardrails around it, despite of whatever the models went through themselves, including the ability to label data down to the cell level and making sure that need to know is enforced. So when you grant access to data to somebody, you can track exactly the label and the access of the user for the markings of the data. So, whether it's CUI or secret or top secret, the data get labeled and then the user has access to specific labels to be able to see the data or not. And that's enforced all the way through the model and the handling of the model response and the filtering of the data going to the model as well.
All right. Thanks, Nick. We have another one that just popped up in the Q&A. If you want to answer that offline, we're going to go ahead and move to the next demo.
Sounds good.
Up next, we have Danielle Shaw. She's the Vice President of Product Commercialization at Echelon. She's working on advancing their Lynx launch point platform, and it's designed to modernize market research and strengthen supplier engagement. So Danielle, over to you for your demonstration.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. There we go. All right, so just a little bit of background on kind of the concept of surrounding links before we kind of get into the details of showing you kind of the application and how it works. So Lynx is a suite of tools. It is a group of applications that all have different use cases. One of those is called Expanse, which is very focused on industry users, which builds out capabilities. Their profile statements has guided roadmaps and helps them to engage with the government procurement process. The second application that is in production right now and being used is called Lynx Alliance. And it is very focused around advisory organizations or people who want to, support small businesses in their growth or businesses in general with their growth. So this could be technology innovation centers, some prime suppliers, but generally focused around the Apex Accelerator offices who are the main focal point users of that tool right now. And then we have an application called Links Launch Point, and that is for government users, contracting officers, program managers, government management offices for different purposes. And that's where we tie those things together to support processes like market research or analyzing DIB readiness, things like that. And so these applications all work together to kind of bring that to the forefront. One of the things that we found is that it's hard to kind of address all these issues and all these different user needs all at the same time. And so what we wanted to do is really focus each application individually for those needs and really build out a strong return on investment for the companies as they use the tool, as well as the users for the different stakeholders. So the first one I'm going to show you guys today is called Links Expanse. So this is the industry application. The purpose of the industry application is to really give industry a guided, supported tool that lets them engage with opportunities and matching opportunities to their services, as well as defining different pathways that are very specific to activities that they want to engage in with the government. And so it makes it easy for them, like one-stop shop where they can go and access all information associated with that activity in one place. It also helps them to build out a really extensive government profile, a company profile. And so in this case, a company could go in and enter in information, and this is all AI driven. So when they establish their profile, they would put in marketing statements or videos or whatever it is that they have about their company, and we would generate this profile for them that is very robust in nature, talking about their details of what their actual capabilities are. It is attached to SAM, so if they do have a SAM profile, it would pull in all of the data and information associated with that, and we provide tags associated with their core capabilities, differentiators, so on and so forth. They could enter in their products and services, and this would also allow them to kind of assess their, TRL if it's applicable or MRL if it's applicable. In the future, we want to really build out an AI-supported capability for that. It gives like a quick view of their capabilities that they put in, and I'll show you a little bit more on that here in a second. Any contacts that are already available in the system for SAM or that they've entered, as well as any past performance that they've entered. Now, this is exportable into a ready-made marketing slick sheet that companies can use right off the bat. Like I said, the goal here is to provide return on investment just for them engaging in the system. So this is provided at no cost to them to use, and they can engage on creating this profile and share it, use it in outreach events, etc. They're encouraged to put in this basic information like their core competencies and offerings. So again, they would have different tags that they could prioritize. This is what kind of builds out that view that you were just seeing a second ago. The other thing that Links Expanse really focuses on is classification and mapping so that you don't have to do it yourself. And so one of the things we do is take it to the next level. It's not just NAICS code related. We do a map to NAICS codes, but we want to get down into the weeds of what these companies do. So we want to understand like the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives, like what are they actually, which part of the supply chain does that company fit in, so that we can really classify them and provide them good matches when it comes to the opportunity and roadmap matching that you're going to see here in a second. So anything that they create as far as a NAICS code, it would automatically map to associated industry areas that we might feel matches that, and vice versa, so that it kind of serves as that translation capability between NAICS code mapping and commercial industries that sometimes becomes a challenge for companies. Going back to the dashboard, there's a lot of areas on the company profile that a company can fill out. They're all related to specific pathways. So those guided approaches to different capabilities that we want to have. But for the initial engagement, really what we're looking for is just to build out that robust company profile. And the reason we want to do that is because we want to provide them matches. So in the background, we are looking at opportunities. So this is using all the opportunities posted in cm.gov. It also looks at state and local opportunities, and we're adding additional sources of data for this currently. And you can actually see all of these here filter through different opportunities. You get notified of new ones, and we try to match those automatically to your company. And the goal here is to really limit that, because what happens with a lot of the searches today is that you go in and you find it, you get like 7,000 matches, and it's just very overwhelming if you don't really understand how to dig through that and understand what the requirements are. So one of the unique features here is this submission effort level, and really allowing you to filter by the level of submission. So say that I'm a new business, I've never really done work with the Department of Defense, the Department of War before, and we are looking to engage. What we can do is to try to show you, hey, these are things that in the clause language or the requirements of that solicitation, it may be a little bit less complex to propose against that. Just so that it's another way of filtering through the organizations. Or if you're someone who is very experienced in that space and really feels like they could do, a large scale source selection with multiple volumes, and they have all the setup to accommodate that and be competitive in that space, then you can look for something that's a little bit more heavy in nature. It's just another way of filtering it to try to really hone in on what's right for that company, right? And so we get into the weeds of looking at every attachment, all the clause language, and defining additional filters that aren't in some of the other systems that are out there for just being able to look through opportunities. And we provide those matches that you can actually engage on. Okay, the other thing that we provide on this front end is market analytics. So this goes back into just looking at the competitive landscape of the market that you are in or that you would like to be in. In this case, it pulls your primary NAICS code if you have it identified. And it just shows government obligations within that space over time. You can filter it down by different agencies, small business or other than small business types, so that you can actually see if this is an accessible market for small business if you are one. It also looks at other companies that are possibly winning contracts in that area, if it's somewhere that you want to possibly engage as becoming like a sub to one of those primes, if that's an option for you, or maybe a teaming partner. And it also looks at the trends over time to see, hey, is this trending up? Is small businesses tending to trend up here or going down? Just so you can kind of get an idea of the landscape when it comes to this area. The other thing that we match to is resources. So we want to organize this by like topics. So we provide topical based support, and we are not creating this information. We are just pulling it together and surfacing it into things that are, most usually asked for when it comes to from an outreach perspective, right? How can I find how can I get ready to provide for the government, something like that, right? So it's very simple into different topic areas, and this is an area we're building out. And the other thing is networking. And this is where we start to connect to the other application. So this is where we can go and search for government organizations, maybe other companies that you might want to engage with as either prime or teaming partners. And again, Links is providing matches to these that are relevant to your core capabilities or complementary to your core capabilities in certain cases. They also look at different government organizations, as well as other organizations that you may want to engage on from an advisory perspective. So let's say you wanted to work with an Apex Accelerator office. I could go in and actually, choose an advisor area here. Let's say I wanted to work with the Alabama Apex Accelerator. I could actually see information about that accelerator. I could understand about their mission, what they have going on, and I could actually request advisory services related to that. Once I did that, it would show here. And on the alliance side, which I'm not going to go into for time today, you would actually be able to have an advisor provide you recommendations and actually engage with you effectively. So from the Apex advisor perspective, they have a system where they're actually engaging with these clients and providing opportunities and tracking metrics and notes associated with their growth. And so it helps support them on the other side. And so this is the connection point between the Alliance application that I was discussing earlier and the Links Expanse. Now, moving forward just really quickly into kind of where this connects back to the next tool, which is called Links Launchpoint, which is currently in development right now. And I can actually show you, this is a design of kind of the concept of that. But this is where the market research application really becomes apparent, right? So this is the government portal, right? So of links, where you as a program manager or a contracting officer would be able to engage. And this would have a dashboard very similar to that. The focus here is really building up industry engagement, seeing if there's any events that you are participating in your organization. And it would have an actual capability of you being able to manage your profile as a government organization, so that you would have the ability to kind of have that similar view as well, as involve yourself with the market research process, where we automate the actual far required processes for all of market research. And that's where this really ties together, supporting the ability for a contracting officer to have AI guided applications that help them through commerciality determinations or competitive analysis or strategic market research. And so within this market research actual application, it actually builds the report for you, and has AI supported tools throughout the process to actually engage and help you build that collaborative market research report with your team and store it from a knowledge sharing perspective enterprise wide, so that people can start to actually capitalize on the work that's being done across the enterprise and find vendors or engage with vendors more effectively from that perspective.
Okay. So this was put up during Nick's, but I think you could probably answer this question too in terms of your tool, Danielle. But how do you utilize historical program outcomes and associated structured and unstructured data to continuously improve your tool's accuracy and reliability over time?
Okay. Yeah, I could definitely talk to that. I mean, that's really what Links is all about. I mean, that's kind of the core idea here, right? Is that we want to pull all this information, especially on the market research side, to learn from it. So within Links, we actually have feedback options for vendors to provide very good feedback on the opportunities that they're seeing or ways that we can improve to help really learn from that. We also pull all the historical information from previous opportunities to help learn what the trends are for an organization, specifically to our application. When it comes to market research, it's the same thing. When we start to create, requirements and define the projects and define the objectives and techniques that are used across the board, we are right sizing that within that process, right? So we say, okay, here, based on historical data, here's the most advantageous techniques or objectives that have been used in the market research process, and we apply that so that a person has a starting point and doesn't have to start from the very beginning, just creating this all on their own. It's already available for them and helps to generate and guide them through the process the whole way.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
All right, next up we have Kevin Forbes. He's a principal software engineer at MITRE. He's near and dear to Ryan and I because he brings all of our acquisition visions to life through AI. His expertise is not just with AI, though. He's got a wide range of technologies, including full stack software engineering, agile DevOps, mobile apps, robotics, and cloud computing. So, Kevin, over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Adam. Good afternoon, everyone. As Adam said, I am Kevin Forbes from the MITRE Corporation. And for those that don't know, just a little bit of scene setting. We're maybe the orange in the basket of apples. We're a little different. MITRE is a nonprofit organization of federally funded research and development centers. Basically, we're a line item in the congressional budget. We're here to do deep technical research in the public interest, which means we partner with both government and industry to look at, the challenges our nation is facing and how do we help with that. Specifically, what we're here to talk about today is part of our acquire research, our acquisition AI research. And what our focus is that we're doing, as Ryan sort of mentioned in his story about RFI analysis, is how do we use AI to minimize administrative burdens and to improve decision making, right? Like there's a number of use cases that you'll see on my end slide of how we're using some of our research today, to advance some of those things. As I said, the little bit orange to the apple basket, MITRE's not here to compete with industry, right? So the tool I'm about to show you is really a prototype. It's early research. You're not going to see our acquire tool sets necessarily out there that you would go buy per se. Really, what we're doing is our research is there to inform our government partners to get their hands dirty with this technology, to experience some of the impacts that they could see, and use it to help inform their acquisition purchases of like those technologies you just saw in the 3 previous demos that had really good impactful things that they could do. But how can a government organization or a government program take technologies like that and adopt it and really bring it into their organization to get the best bang for their buck? And so that's what our research is doing, to look at specific use cases that maybe are niche and aren't, you know, a general purpose sort of thing, or a specifically, like in this case, an acquisition activity that we could really drill into, so that that information, lessons learned, could be fed into future development by industry. We do that, as you see on the slide, because we bring a multidiscipline approach. Ryan and Adam bring the acquisition smarts. I bring some of the software and AI guys to support our team, because, as Ryan likes to say, the acquisition guys can't build the tools, but they know what they need, and that's something that the tech guys don't necessarily know. And so we bring that together as a cooperative effort. We are looking at things across cradle to grave, across the acquisition lifecycle. We're going to show you obviously one small sliver of that, which is the example Ryan mentioned of RFI review. And we're doing this, as you can see, for a bunch of different government organizations that are listed there. And so I'll jump into the demo because that's enough background. But the last thing I do want to key you off of is, through our research, we have found that a lot of both AI and acquisition, or at least where the two meet, activities follow this very basic pattern, right? In acquisitions, there's always a starting point of some preceding information or some preceding documents that usually the humans are working off of and need to analyze our process, right? And that is going into yet another government, acquisition artifact. For example, in an RFI case, our RFI assessments may be leading into a market research report, right? So I'm going to show you our Cliff tool. So let me get out of slide mode and show you our tool. You can see here, so the research we're doing is trying to find, we call them micro tools, right? I'm not trying to build a big old monolithic acquisition sort of tool. As I said, I'm looking for specific uses of AI that can help with a specific use case in the acquisition lifecycle, whether that's helping process RFIs, dealing with source selection decision documents, writing a mission needs statement, or doing some evaluation of proposals. But let's see how this tool works, and you'll kind of get a sense of it. So I'm going to start a new run here, and I'm just going to do, title it an RFI demo for you all. We are very careful with the data that goes in there. Our users can mark what they do. What that does is, of the various AI models that we've limited based on your data sensitivity, it'll reduce and limit which ones you can work with, but I'm just going to select GPT-OSS for this demo. And then, as I mentioned, we're doing RFI use case. For those that may or may not familiar with how that works, the government will send out a request for information. In this case, this particular is a public open source one back from 2019. And the DOE was looking for, how do I enhance the resiliency of the electrical grid, right? And they kind of wanted to know two major things in here. They wanted to know, what recommendations does industry have for it, and are there economic benefits? So I'm showing you this in Excel form because it'll be very obvious in just a second. But when the RFI goes out, industry responds, and now I'm just going to batch load these responses into the tool. If I had background context information, I can definitely upload that too. In this case, I'm going to give it that RFI, the exact RFI that went out to industry, just so you can see that. And then lastly, or step 2, as part of that 1, 2, 3 process I showed on the slide, I'm going to upload those prompts that I just showed you. Again, it's these, hey, I want to know for each company what recommendations and what economic benefits they had, right? And then I can go ahead and say go. It's going to queue up the the data, and it's going to start processing. And so I can come back here, and you can see here it's jumping in here, and it's queued. It will get the process updates. But for brevity of the demo, I'm going to go ahead and just jump to the finished results here. We do have an output preview window like you would expect with a chatbot. In a pseudo word-like interface, you can come in here and ask stuff. If you were really working on it real time, you can ask the AI for help there to help you rewrite things. But ultimately, if you really just wanted to do quick in, quick out of this, you can download the results, and what that results in is a quick zip file package that, for each of the files that you gave in there, it's giving you individual work, individual outputs on it, or a spreadsheet that shows you, all of your questions aligned next to each other. So in this case, for Enterix here, right, what recommendations they have, nice bulleted list, what economic benefits they have, nice bulleted list. Or I can, if I had questions that were sort of asking for things across them, I could, look at all of them in a nice spreadsheet view and, look, longitudinally along them and check out differences. So as I showed early on this, right, this is our sort of, and you can see there it's going, this is our sort of, hammer or Swiss Army knives to do lots of little things for our early explorations, and how we use both this tool and our tool set across the board is, exploring some of those different concepts to help the government, try to adopt some of these technologies and see their impact. I mentioned proposal evaluation, protest review for source selection, decision documents, and then a variety of other things here, right? And again, all of this work is intended to empower the acquisition workforce, not replace them. And we're seeking to help the government how they can apply this technology, how they can adopt certain things and adopt tools that help them do their jobs better, and then normalize it both across their organization and in all their processes. So with that, I think I am right on cue because Miles and Adam asked for a 2-minute warning. So Adam, any final question in chat that I didn't see?
No, appreciate the demo. We're coming up on panel time anyway, so appreciate everyone that provided a demo. If there's any further questions, please put them in the question and answer so that they can continue to answer as we're going through the panelists. I'm going to hand it over to ML Mackey, who's going to introduce the panel. So thanks again, everyone, and appreciate it.
What an interesting set of demos. And we have a really fantastic group that's going to talk to you today. Good afternoon. My name is ML Mackey. I'm the CEO of Beacon Interactive Systems, an executive committee member of the NDIA National Board, and the chair of NDIA Small Business Division. It is my pleasure today to introduce the moderator and panelists for our webinar. Our moderator is Mr. Farouk Mitha. In both my Beacon and NDIA roles, I've had the opportunity to work with Farouk in his capacity as the director of the DoD Office of Small Business Programs. Among many accomplishments during that tenure, he helped revitalize the Mentor Protege program, a valuable and impactful resource for many of our NDI members. Prior to that, Farouk was involved in a variety of OSD R&E roles, where his reputation for being the go-to guy to get things done was genuinely built. Among many accomplishments while there, he helped to stand up the manufacturing institutes as well as DIU. Thank you, Farouk, for what you do, and looking forward to your insights during this conversation today. Our panelists include industry members from across the digital transformation ecosystem. Our first panelist is Nick Shalan. Nick is the former Air Force Chief Software Officer, a role stood up under Will Roper's leadership. Nick is currently the CEO and founder of Ask Sage, a company delivering a GPT-driven platform providing a cutting-edge AI assistant for both government and commercial teams. We had a little bit of insight into that during the lightning demonstrations. I'm really looking forward to your contribution to our conversation, Nick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Next up is Justin Collins. Justin spent 10 years as an acquisition manager for the Air Force and is now at MITRE, where he is the project lead for Air Force Global Strike Command and the NC3 program. As he described during our prep session, his forte is bringing the portfolio aspect into acquisition, a topic that is definitely near and dear to my heart. Developing capabilities is wonderful, and figuring out how to do the throughput to make the impact of delivery is just critical to the whole process. And our third panelist today is Nick LaRivere. Nick is the CEO and a co-founder of Prism. Prism provides an AI-driven operating system for federal capture and acquisition. And while Nick is definitely an entrepreneur and a company leader, during our prep session, he described himself as a software engineer at heart. I appreciate that sentiment. And I appreciate the time that you're all taking to discuss this important topic today. With that, over to you, Farouk.
Thank you so much, ML. Thanks to you, Arun, NDIA and the ETI team as a whole for bringing us all together today. We saw some really, really great and useful demos over the past hour. And Ryan Novak gave some really good context about market research. And just from my experience working at the Pentagon for most of the last 15 years, I really learned that market research is the cornerstone to competition. And you saw all the tools that were just demoed, and there's applicability to different stakeholders. And I just kind of want to drill down on what that means and who all of those stakeholders really are. You have industry, and you saw ways that industry looks for opportunities and wants to present themselves to government. But then you also have a lot of stakeholders in the government. You've got small business professionals. When I was in my last job at the Pentagon, we had 750 small business professionals across all of the uh, military departments and defense agencies. Many of their roles were conducting market research to influence acquisition planning. But you have contracting officers, you've got program managers, you've got other requirements owners, and that's thousands of people. And then you've got on the outside, you've got other resource providers like our Apex accelerators from the department, manufacturing institutes, PIA partners, and others. So there's this constant flow of folks across the spectrum that are looking for companies, that are looking for companies that match requirements, creating market research reports. And the reality is that none of this data is really shared. It just stays with the person that's doing the work. And I think the use of many of these tools creates more transparency, creates the ability to share information, to not have to duplicate efforts. So we're gonna have a really great conversation, is the bottom line. We've got three really great experts on this field here that can help kind of dig in a little bit. Uh, I'm gonna tee up some questions to get the conversation going, but we also want to take questions from you. So please put questions in the chat, put questions in the Q&A box. And if you want to direct your question to a specific person, let me know who that is so I can make sure it gets routed to the right person. But I do want to kick it off with just a question to get the juices flowing here. I just want to point back to what Ryan Novak was saying about in his opening remarks to the demos about the challenges that contracting officers and acquisition teams face when doing market research. And look, we'll talk about AI, and we can think about all the things AI can do from now and what it might be doing 5 years from now to help us. But just to all of you, and I'll start with Nicholas, and then maybe we can go to Justin and Nick. What can AI help with right now?
Well, that's a big question. I think it can help with pretty much everything. I think it's pretty scary. 2 weeks ago, OpenClaw came out and changed my life at a degree that I was not expecting, which scares me for my kids, what they're gonna do for work. Replacing dozens of non-blue collar jobs from marketing to coding to research to everything. It's very scary. I was effectively able to create a whole new company and product in 3 days. I've done it before, but never at that pace. You're going to see a rise of one-person companies and innovation coming out of everywhere. What's even more scary, I guess, is China has now deployed it all over the CCP, and 40% of OpenClaw consumption is coming from China. So huge adoption. And I think overall, you still have a lot of security issues, a lot of concerns, a lot of ethical concern, and plenty of valid things, right? But for the first time, I think now it's pretty official that if you don't use it, you're going to get so far behind, you're going to be irrelevant, you don't have a choice, and it's scary, it's still pretty technical and complex to use it. Most people don't have the training, right? So we're going to put together a whole free YouTube playlist that people can watch to learn and jump on this, because it's such a game changer. For the first time, AI can actually complete complex tasks. If you go to the new website we set up, oohas.com, you're going to see the website, and it was one prompt on OpenClaw to build the entire website. Not even a photo up, not even like, hey, change this. So it is just completely, that would have cost me $60,000 in 4 months with a web company to build the website. In fact, we just did the Astage website, and that cost me 60 grand and took 4 months. And this is better and faster, and it took about 4 minutes and cost me about $1, right? So this is scary. I don't even know what, kids should study, what should they do, but clearly it's everything, right? So.
No, thanks. That's a good kind of frame setter for the whole conversation, which is great. Justin, welcome your thoughts. And if you could dig in a little bit on the market research side, especially, that would be really helpful given your experience inside of government as well.
Yeah, sure thing. And just for the community, so I've worked in the nuclear command control world for most of my adult life. So Nick, your comments resonate very significantly to me, right, on some of the scariness. But I think there's opportunity there too, right, that we can address today. And when I think about the market research side of the house, I just took a few notes from the demos, right? So Tim talked about directing technical focus. Nick, I gravitated towards your, decision tree and consideration aspect of the brief. Danielle talked about, pathways for activities and company profiles and networking. And then Kevin, focused on, to some degree, proposal evaluation and decision criteria. I think all those are super important because market research, in my mind, can be very specific. And I think AI can help us do a broader look at the landscape to understand what is the end user need, whether it be a warfighter or somebody on a keyboard or whomever. And then what is the path to get to a decision maker that's ultimately going to provide direction for either funding or an acquisition or a milestone decision. So I think AI can help us see the broader landscape to actually address a specific need without us having to reinvent the wheel over and over again, because there are a lot of technical solutions out there that can all play a part in this space. But understanding, like, with budgets going up or down, or requirements oscillating to some degree, where we can actually understand the broader market writ large, I think helps both the government and the companies supporting the government to get to a solution that makes sense. So I think that's the opportunity where AI, kind of where Ryan led off on, can provide some significant blocking and tackling to start the process, and then we can reason upon it, as the human in the loop. So that's my 2 cents. Over.
Yeah, thanks. And Nick, welcome your thoughts. I would love your thoughts, especially from the context of Prism and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, thank you for having me here. Thank you for having us here. I'm Nick, co-founder and CEO of Prism. I'm a self-professed, AI optimist. So I'm a big believer that AI will be, a massive beneficial source for good across, all these different ecosystems. However, it is not like a one size fits all. Like, it's not a tool that will instantaneously solve every problem. But what I think it can immediately do, especially in the realm of market research, is it can take what previously took humans, tons and tons of time, months and months of time, whether that's, synthesizing and aggregating across data sources, putting that into an Excel spreadsheet, sorting it, ordering it, all these types of, market research activities that so much of us are already doing today. It can basically raise the floor on that. So AI can come in and handle so much of that aggregation and synthesis step right out of the box. Prism already does that today with our work with DIU, with our work with commercial companies. We built out this entire data pipeline, this AI engine that allows you to sort through and work with that. But I think that's where things get incredibly interesting, because with that raised floor, I think it enables an even more powerful human in the loop opportunity. So our program managers out there, the folks that are really leading these initiatives, that are doing this type of research, like I think if anything, your impact gets to be even more magnified. AI can synthesize, and it can make decisions, but will it make those decisions well? That continues to be the challenge, right? Because you guys are the ones with the context. You guys are the one with the know-how of, my program, what I'm looking to do, the decisions that I'm trying to make. And so I'm a huge believer that I think AI already across the department, you're seeing it synthesize these large swaths of data that would have taken teams of people beforehand. It's pulling that together for you. So now you can get to the interesting part of the conversation much faster and start to drive forth questions like, now, what do we do with that data? How do we actually make a decision and actually move forth this program in a faster way?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I'll go back to you, Nicholas, and we can go back around. There's been a push in the department for bringing in more commercial products and services, and it spans across administrations. How do we bring in more non-traditional companies? How do we bring in new entrants? How do you all view AI playing a role in that? And what do you think the value add is there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Every administration mentioned the defense industrial base shrinking and trying to help small businesses to get into the department, but at the same time, everything they do is the opposite, right? CMMC, huge barrier to entry for companies to come and try to do any kind of work with the department. Cybersecurity, getting an ATO. I mean, every aspect of doing business from the contracting standpoint to getting clearances to everything is a nightmare, right? Probably the hardest market to get into, way more than finance and healthcare and pick your poison, right? So I think we have a huge opportunity if we actually want to do what we claim we want to do, which is, like you said, using AI to streamline everything, whether it's the process to go through an ATO. I mean, just look at what we did with Asage, getting a R5, 6 and top secret and FedRAMP high in 6 months. And that's, with 4 months of government work that they had to do included. Our stuff was less than a month, So, it's, if you can use those tools, right, and look, it still cost me 250 grand, right? Which is insane, most companies can afford it, right? And that's me doing it and I know how to do it. And, and I did it alone, which isn't unheard of, right? Usually you have a team of 10 people and you have to pay a 3 PAO to do the report. And, so, the barrier to entry is so insane. If we don't use automation, and don't also maybe become a little bit more flexible to let startup engage and get involved in CBROs are great, right? I mean, CBROs is a great way to get in, but it's it's a lottery, right? So there's limitation to the success of that, and people can spend a lot of money to get to apply for a phase one. And even when I applied, sometimes with the same scope, one for a sitter, one of us a SIBR, then one has a different grade than the other one, right? Even though it's the same scope, so there's no uniform analysis of these SIBRs. So AI could be used to analyze and assess the SIBRs too, right? So every aspect we need to ruthlessly really try to remove those bottlenecks. And even when you get an award, right, then you have to go through an ATO. You get this PA, and then you have to still get an agency to do an ATO, right? There's no reciprocity across agencies, despite 20 memos mandating it. It never happens, right? So I think I'm kind of done with paperwork and all the right thing that the leadership says or doesn't say. At the end of the day, what should matter is actions, right? And we need to see more of that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, so I hear what Nicholas is saying, and I agree with it pretty wholeheartedly. My 2 cents would be, are there better ways for us to define the decision-making criteria that actually matters, that will allow AI to do the things that we're espousing? So, I'm a DoD, now DOR, guy by trade, right? There are statutory requirements that we know, where if you get, a traditional acquisition program, milestone A, B, C, what have you, that are huge burdens to program managers to create a test and evaluation master plan, system engineering plan, whatever, right? You can go down the list. if you actually distill it down, there's probably like 30 salient information needs across all that documentation, which is kind of a cottage industry in and of itself. And I think if we're talking about AI and market research and thinking about how to mitigate risk across the profile, we need to make sure we understand what the decision-making calculus is so that AI can enable us to effectively mitigate that risk across multiple entities. So I think there's a front-end piece that I'm not sure we've all grappled with collectively to say this is the no-kidding stuff that matters for a decision maker to award a contract, administer a decision, activity, what have you, to actually move forward. And I think that would be a really, in my mind, interesting thought process to go through as a community.
And sorry, if I can interject for a minute, Justin, are you saying, especially in evaluating some of these like non-traditionals, like what is the criteria that we're evaluating them upon before moving them into like deeper contracting
100%.
Conversations? Yeah.
Yeah. And I could give like I don't know if this is more nuanced than we need to go, but like a lot of my world is dealing with radios, right? And like software defined radios are kind of the big thing right now. And those radios could be modified in a lot of different ways to do a lot of different things, right? But the requirements matter to the end user in the consumption of them, whether it's a conventionally configured radio or a strategically configured radio, what have you. But at the end of the day, if AI could help level that playing field to say, I can produce a radio and then make modifications on it, I think the logistical tail end of that would be a significantly decreased cost to the government and actually also open up the aperture for industry. But we don't really talk about that way, right? We say, I'm going to take this one out and put this one in. And I think AI can really help us if we understand what the key parameters are that the operational community needs to infer upon that decision to make an investment. And market research should help with that. And I think AI can play a huge role. Does that answer your question?
No, that was really interesting. Yeah, really interesting context. I think, because I think one of like the big pieces that needs to be solved, and if you want to expand the broader DIB, right, you want to get the defense industrial base more broadly expand. I think one of the first pieces is like what I would call like the discovery or the awareness stage, which is, a lot of these like early companies, a lot of these companies that are trying to move and work with the government for the first time, I can promise you, because we work with a bunch of them, they're very interested in working with the government, but they actually have a tough time finding what the government needs until it's too late, because, opportunities and solicitations are living across, 100 different sources, and there's offline industry day events that are happening. And so it's really actually hard for them to aggregate some of that. I think AI lowers the barrier to entry there so that they can come in and understand what government needs. But I think on the other side, I think it's really important for government to have an understanding of what are they actually looking for and start communicating out those requirements earlier, even during some of those initial like market research stages. Because I think businesses are just starting to think about that. They're just starting to think about how can I come in and engage with the government. And ultimately, from there, I think there was a question that was asked in the chat about, well, some of these, broader commercial companies are coming to work with the government for the first time. How do we actually, sift the signal from the noise? How do we determine who is just overly hyped and who is for real? I think that's another place where like data in particular and AI becomes very paramount. To Justin's point, I think if you've understood your requirements, you can then, again, with these big data pipelines and AI synthesizing for you, you can very quickly tell who is meeting these requirements or whatnot. We've already built out profiles like that. I'm sure there's other places where you can find that as well. But I think looking at things like, past, commercial revenue, are they here to stay? What's the viability of their product? Who have they taken money from? And is it US money? Is it overseas money? Answering some of those questions to help sort the signal from the noise. And then as you're building the discovery of where to work with government, also then building a better process to vet and evaluate those companies.
I think Nick and Farouk, I'm sorry, but I'll just say one more thing and then I'll be quiet. There's a huge opportunity cost that we are losing, I think, on the government side by not allowing that connection for IRAD to actually kick in on the industry side. So our industry IRAD dollars have gone down pretty significantly. If you look at, some trends, because we don't have a clear demand signal and we're not having that exchange between the two. So I think from I think about, us from like a, strategic security perspective, I think we're actually shooting ourselves in the foot to some degree because we can't sift through exactly what you just said, Nick, and give a proper demand signal for IRAD dollars.
Yeah.
That might push the conversation a little bit more towards the future on what the future requirements should be looking like. So we're not building systems for, the 1980s, because that's how we operate them now. We're building a system for the future. And I think AI and the market research, if there's a compelling conversation to be had, could really push that in a positive direction. So sorry for over speaking, Farouk, but just
No,
two
no.
cents.
This is a great conversation, which is what we want. And actually, I'm going to pivot a little bit myself and go to a question that came in from the audience, because I think it kind of connects to what you guys are saying. And the question is, and I'll throw this out there for any of you who wants to answer: could an AI-enabled discovery tool be built to help PMs quickly determine whether the department has already funded or developed a given capability? Oh, the question disappeared before I could finish it. But I think you saw where I was going. Like, there's this idea of duplicative investments. And I think, Justin, to your point of opportunity cost, how can we use AI to avoid those decisions, those types of decisions, or sometimes just mistakes because of lack of information from the government side?
Yeah. Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah,
Farouk?
please.
Yeah, I think I would first say absolutely yes. Right. Although we're many organizations, we're a single department, and our efforts should be in concert with one another. And for the very first time, I think with AI, we're pulling together all this public data on federal contracting so that you can see, what programs are already out there, how have they performed, who's on contract. Now, I think the interesting layer beyond that is to say, well, with the public data realm, we can already tell a lot. We can tell which organizations are funding which efforts over time, how they've performed. Did the POP get pushed back? Did this get modded up? Did it get canceled for convenience? All of those questions. But I think where it gets interesting is then there's another layer here, which is within the department, can we also handle sensitive data? Can we also then see, some of the quote unquote like black budget? Can we see, some of these other efforts and initiatives that maybe have like deepening detail that is not made public? Tools like ours, I know Ask Sage as well, others are already at this like IL 5 or IL 6 level, can handle some of that data. I think the harder part that will be difficult to run down on that broader piece is how do we then, as a department, think about when and how and where to share that data. Obviously, if it's at that level of CUI, top secret, beyond, it is private for a reason. And that's the only place where I say, I think we still have a ways to go as an organization, as a department, is to think about, sometimes we probably overclassify, and maybe there's opportunities for kind of more robust data sharing within organizations. However, there's also very real reasons for those controls, and we have to be mindful of those. So that's the only piece where I say I think AI can help a ton on that, but I think there's also a compliance question to say, as we pull in private federal data, how do we think about how do we think about the collaboration piece of sharing that data?
Nicholas, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's always very difficult, right? I think humans are always going to tend to overprotect, right? And there's a little fiefdom going on, and people always overreact when it comes to any kind of data loss. And you look at even the CUI markings, right? The training is not there. You have different rules if you are a contractor or if you're a government employee. You have different controls. Actually, when you compare CMMC with 800-171 controls from the government side with 800-53 controls. So there's no even standard when it comes to protecting CUI data, depending on where you host it, if you host it on the cloud, if you host it on premise, as a government employee, as a contractor. So, the whole thing is a joke, So I think we need to really go back to what's important for the nation to be able to move at a pace of relevance against China. And I always go back with China. What are they doing better? How are they doing it better? And how we're going to be able to compete against, 1.5 billion people. And I'm worried about it because we spend a lot of money with very little to show for it, and we can't afford it anymore. And the gap is shrinking, and they're taking the lead on, quantum compute and hypersonics and many different fields where we used to be 20 years ahead. And so we can't afford it anymore. And I think we just hide against, very easy SKUs again and again until we can't afford it anymore. So.
Yeah, and Justin, we'll add one little wrinkle to the same question, but there's another question in the chat that I think you might be able to also help address. Is my original question, plus what happens when you start aggregating all this data, and what security concerns could that bring about?
Yeah, there's a myriad, right? We deal with this all the time. So I think the security concerns are real, and having classification guidance that is not overly restrictive, but sets the path is one of them. But I would kind of go back to the original question a little bit, Farouk, and say where I think AI and specifically in the context of market research could really help is if we had an understanding from, and again, sorry, I keep going back to Department of War examples because that's my background, but like, what are the commander's existing risks? And I can't remember which demo had it, but one demo had a really nice slide that was showing like, RDT&E funding versus, sustainment funding versus whatever. If I were a commander, I think it'd be really interesting to know I have these 5 mission areas and my investment profile against those mission areas is either getting after future things or just sustaining existing. And the market research in between is showing me that there are better things out there where maybe I can actually, retire a capability at a cheaper cost than it is to sustain it today, that actually buys me more margin on the mission sets that I'm required to support. So I think, that could be an interesting balance where AI might be able to help us adjudicate those risk reward, decision-making criteria to say, I'm going to pay $1 billion to reinvest in a technology that, the OEM no longer exists. Original engineering manufacturer, at the expense of paying $500 million for a capability that actually pushes me in the direction that I want to go in the future. And if AI and market research can help slim down that decision-making criteria, I think that would be a huge win in the Department of War across the board, because generally we don't retire anything, we just replace it or keep it limping along. And I think we need to retire more things and put more, future-oriented capability into the field. So I think the security, the aggregation of information is a huge risk for sure. But I do think there's a huge opportunity within industry right now to try and correlate between effectively mitigating operational risk in today's baseline and then projecting what the future should look like.
No, that makes sense. And then just kind of building a little bit on everything, I guess. One complaint that I used to hear a lot when I was in the small business job was about the subjectivity in the entire acquisition process. And I don't want to get into every part of the acquisition process here, but from a market research perspective, how do you think AI can bring more neutrality and objectivity to the process? And maybe I'll go in reverse order, and Nick, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think AI can provide neutrality into both the market research process, but the broader contracting process by first forcing us to look at the data itself. So rather than, I guess there's a couple of different components here. I think rather than one looking subjectively at a vendor's website or what they've submitted, we can first just on the glance just look at like the data profile that we've built around them by pulling together as much data as possible to see, well, actually how TRL level is their capability, again, where do they have funding from, how have they performed on like past contracts? So we can answer some of those like really robust questions right off the bat. So you can start to see, who's legit, who's here to stay. And then I think rather than one thing that we're seeing a lot of, federal organizations do, which I think we'll probably see folks continue to lean into is once you have that basis and you're evaluating vendors, I think then, once it even gets time for, submission review, I think AI gets to be like pretty helpful to like review those initial submissions and give it a really, what's the right word? Rather than subjective, a really objective scoring of the vendor's submission to say, did it meet these criteria? Did they actually demonstrate the ability to do X, Y, and Z? And then again, I'm still a believer in human in the loop. Like I think human in the loop can then come in and still make those final decisions. But up until that point, right, so much of that was really done in an objective way, just looking at the data, which really tells the truth. And then you finally making your discretionary decision versus having subjectivity through each facet of the decision-making process.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these processes, when you're in the government, it's not like your full-time job. It's like another duty as assigned. It can help make things more efficient, I think. And maybe
Totally.
Justin would love to kind of get you to weigh in. Oh, Justin, if you want to weigh in.
Oh, sorry. No, I was doing the same thing. So like doing, source selections or things like that, like even if we had like a keyword tag that said like requirement of the RFI was X, response is Y.
Yeah.
Did it even hit the topic of the requirement itself? Just to filter that out, I think would save a lot of hours over a lot of people going through that process before, right? Because
and Justin, can I interject there just to say,
no, please.
Vendors are already doing that. Vendors are doing that with AI proposal writer tools. We've got one of them, but there's a flurry of others out there. They're already doing that to say, what did the solicitation ask for? And then some sort of matrix to check, like, did I hit this? Like, government should have the same thing. Like, you guys should have the same tool to help with that same evaluation.
And I would say the caveat, and this for maybe goes back to like not necessarily a aggregation point, but like a security point, is I think the government should also know if a proposal was written by AI.
Yes.
So it goes both ways, right? like I don't want AI writing me a proposal because Nick is really smart with AI, but could never build the radio that I want to build. So I think we have to have that balance and those guardrails in place. And that was no affront on you, Nick. I don't know.
No, you're 100% right. Like, and you just don't want AI slop. Like, that's why I continue to push like for human in the loop. Like, humans need to be involved in these things. Like, we make really good informed decisions. We add real context, and it makes the really good people even more powerful. I think AI does. But if you misuse it, it can obviously send you down the wrong path.
Yeah.
And Nicholas, you from an Ask Sage perspective, you guys have a pretty robust offering with different features. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's obviously very difficult to change people's culture, right? And I'm afraid we're not bold enough. I love what people are saying here, but I think we need a more drastic change. We're talking about just little anecdotal improvements, and my take is we need to completely change the system. I think it needs to be reinvented, and the only way sometimes to do that is to completely start from scratch, right? So I don't know, I guess if, using it the way we should already be using it, just like Nick said, companies use it all the time. I don't know if we're going to be able to detect forever if AI wrote it or not. I think it's going to be impossible pretty soon. But regardless, I think we need to really have the right criteria of selection. I remember one of the bid I did when I was the chief software in the Pentagon, and we had 150 companies that did a bid, and 10 we had a top 10, right, of the writing proposals that I read. So I made my top 10, and then we did in-person interviews with the companies, and the top 10 ended up the bottom 10 after the interview. So the paper stuff is so useless, right? And so but how do people? And I could tell, right? The government people with me had no technical skills. They had no clue. They could have, believed what the company said. But with me, I knew better, and they ended up, not getting the contract. But, do we even have the talent to do that, right? So there's a lot of issues, right? I think there's the lack of technical skills in the department still. A lot of great people are leaving and not coming back. We lost a lot. in the last mass exit, mostly the good ones, not just unfortunately the frozen middle that we want to replace. So there's a lot of issues, but my take is we need to go way more aggressive on this and really embrace AI to a point where, and I agree, by the way, we need humans to validate the findings of the AI. I wouldn't just trust it. But I think we need to go deeper than what we're talking about. We need to completely change the game.
Can you give us just a 1 minute answer on what that would look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think number one, we need to really embrace the agents. The first thing that DoD did when OpenClaw came out is they banned it from the network, right? I mean, come on, I mean, I get it, right? We don't want to run OpenClaw on a Nipper laptop, but there's ways to run things in the sandbox and be able. They did the same with DeepSeek, by the way, right? And DeepSeek, look, it's Chinese, we know it, right? When I gave access to DeepSeek to the IC community, they were able to grasp insights from all these Chinese models to know what are they trying to hide, right? So there's plenty of great things they were able to gather just by having access to the model. They were not going to use it to do stuff, right? They were just researching, but yeah, it was banned, right? So we just overreact. We don't know how to do proper sandboxing and just try things out and trust people. I mean, look, the clearance process is already a nightmare. And the first thing we do is we lock every laptop, block every tool. I mean, they block Chrome developer tools, for God's sake, on fucking Chrome. That's mind-boggling to me what we do to these people that take a huge pay cut. They're working to serve, and we give them the worst tools, the worst laptop, the worst everything, right? So all of it has to change, and it doesn't take a genius to do it. Just take someone with a little bit of courage and stop talking and more doing. So
I'm going to pivot to the other perspective or the other side of the coin on this. We talked a little bit here about AI adoption in the government, and you all know that small businesses make up the largest chunk of the industrial base. And there's a question in the chat that's asking, as industry increasingly recognizes the importance of AI for improving efficiency and consolidating data, many small businesses remain unfamiliar with how to adopt it and are concerned about cost, complexity, and risk. What practical strategies or resources can help ease the financial burden and reduce anxiety for smaller firms as they transition into an AI-enabled business environment? Maybe I'll start with you, Justin, on this one.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I actually think it's a huge advantage. So I'm not sure that I generally work with like larger primes, right? And I'm not going to name any companies, but the big companies in the block. And I think leveraging AI, one is more of a intellectual investment than a monetary investment. And two, I think it actually shapes the playing field in a more advantageous way for a small business than like the historical like gates and processy type applications that the primes usually go through. To me right now, speed wins. So if you can get in front of a user community and say, I can do something that gets you 60, 70, 80% of the way there versus, a pristine solution. And I'll also admit, MITRE can be this way sometimes, right? Where we want every box checked, every nook and cranny. So I'll hit myself on that. I don't think that's what the government is looking for right now. I think they want, hey, 80%, we can demonstrate it, we can get there quickly. And if AI helps enable that, I think it redistributes the entire playing field, is my opinion.
I would just fully,
Yeah,
if I can jump in, I would fully agree with that, Justin. I think it is a huge enabler of a meritocracy. actually this gets into some of the founding story of our company, but my co-founder and I were actually coming from like large organizations and spun off to found Prism, really on the impetus of selling. It was a small capability at the time to the government, but we realized we didn't have, the endless resources that a larger organization had to sell into the government, right? Endless, teams of people analyzing the data, coming up with strategy, and kind of working through the business development process. And so we actually started developing tools for ourselves to sell into the government and understand this data. And that was really the impetus of where the company was born. And so for us, it really leveled the playing field. It allowed us to, with even just like a simple chat interface, to start asking questions and getting these really powerful answers, such as, what organization cares about this topic? Who are the people there that we need to talk to? What previous vendors might be on contract there? Just really helpful questions for industry to be able to engage with. And so it actually leveled the playing field in a lot of ways. Now I personally tend to think, my preference is not for any particular size of organization to win. It's the organization with the best technology that puts the warfighter and our country really at the best advantage. And I think across non-traditional smalls all the way to large primes, I think AI only accelerates the ability to quickly get to those answers and adopt these technologies. So I'm a huge believer that it actually drives that meritocracy.
Nicholas, any thoughts?
No, I agree. I think, when you take a step back and you look at, leveraging these tools in the right way with the right training and the right, well-defined goals, sky is the limit, right? And for small companies, for the first time ever, you could actually ask the AI, to pay attention to CMMC and pay attention to all these government nonsense, right? And actually, with the right models, particularly Claude, 4.6 Opus is a game changer. And you can now have it draft, your code and your entire foundation of your company or your product to be compliant from the ground up. So it's baked in and not bolted on after the fact. And so for the first time ever, small companies with one or two people can actually build amazing things. And so you've got to embrace it, but you've got to know what to ask, right? And that's where, that's why FedRAMP was so easy for me, right? I knew exactly the control. I knew what had to be done. So I would tell the AI, do X, Y, and Z, do it this way, use Kubernetes, use containers, use FIPS crypto, and so every step of it, chain out container, right? So every step of the way, I picked the right architecture decision so that it would work air gapped, it would be cloud agnostic, it would be able to pass compliance, right? So I removed kind of all the bottlenecks by having the right, architecture, the right foundation, which is very difficult to fix after the fact.
Well, you said something interesting there, or really important there, when you said you have to know what to ask. And there's a question, and I'll stay with you, Nicholas, but want others to chime in as well. There's a question from the audience that is asking, is the acquisition workforce ready to use these tools? And what is the average training and ramp up time?
I mean, they got no choice but to be ready, right? You see a massive uptick of number of responses in RFPs because the companies are using AI, right? So they got, I get people coming, crying to us. They're like, I'm getting 10x more volume and I can't handle it, right? So they got no choice, right? To get ready, whether they like it or not, right?
Well, that means the system has no choice but to adopt it because
Right.
will be drowning in paperwork.
Yeah, it's volume. I mean, you just can't compete, right? And so, but it's not as hard as people think. The issue is honestly, people tried it a bit at the beginning. It wasn't perfect. There was a lot of issues, and they gave up, right? And now they have a tough time. Oh, I tried it. It's useless, But now we're at a state where the stuff I do on a day-to-day basis replaces people, like for real, right? And completely. And I just did, an ATO update. It was, something that would have taken probably a week, and we did it in 4 minutes with my agent, and the result was perfect. I didn't change a line of code of the text. So it's scary. I told you. I mean, I'm very scared for the first time in 4 years doing this AI stuff. I'm actually scared. So. That should tell you a lot, because I don't get scared easy.
If you're scared, I don't. The rest of us should be frightened.
I'm very scared, right? And and I made enough money not to work anymore, which is great. But my kid, what are my kids gonna do? What am I gonna, they're homeschooled, and I don't know what to tell the teacher to teach them. You know, coding is useless. You don't want to learn coding. There's no point, Anyway, so stuff that you knew like 5 years ago was a guaranteed job for 20 years allegedly is now gone. And people need to really reflect on that. And acquisition, it's the same. You gotta embrace it. And honestly, I think that the people that don't will be the first to, be gone. And it's scary and not good. I'm not saying I like it. I don't like it. I think it's, AI is a force for good, sure, maybe, but it's also going to be an immense disruptor of the entire industry, and every non-blue collar job will be impacted. So,
Well, Justin, I'll go back to the original question about the acquisition workforce being ready, and maybe based on what Nicholas just said, maybe you could weave in, what does the acquisition workforce even look like in your perspective in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it, to be candid.
I know it's a
but
curveball.
no. Fair enough. I think, Nicholas, the one point that I would key off on what you just said, which I agree with all of it, is even though it went from a week to 4 minutes, you still had to look at the code or the text, I think you put it, to validate from your critical thinking skills that was the appropriate way to move forward. So I think a lot of the more mundane tasks can and should be automated, but we still have to have that critical thinking aspect that says, yes, I can look at this. This makes sense to me. It makes sense in the risk profile of the mission that I'm supporting, or whatever it may be. I think that's the piece that will not go away, even with the advantages that AI gives us. So
I'm going to tell you one thing on this, right? I just had
right.
my agent analyze, an investment I'm about to make, very large, multiple $7 figure, right? I actually listened to the AI without checking what he said, and it's 28 million, right? I can tell you, my background brings no value. I looked at what he said. I'm like, okay, I don't know anything about it. I just went for it. And, Morgan Stanley gave me their analysis and whatever, right? And I picked, they had 9 and I picked 7, private equity investment, whatever, right? And I just went with the AI, without checking. The PDF I read it, sure, but I changed nothing, So, I mean, yes, you're right? I'm not saying the human is gone, but I mean, let's look at facts, right? I used to have to change a bunch of stuff a year ago, right? Like 5, 6 times, and headaches and fighting and getting mad, and right now it's gone, and less these little details now that I improve, and incremental improvement, and whatever, right? But it's like, I mean, I would have waited a week with a human, and by the way, it would have sucked, and I would have to go back and tell him to change it, and right. So I mean, look, I think the financial example I just gave you, of which is a lot of money for me and for everybody on the planet, 100% trusting the AI with no pushback is a proof that even my brain is shifting to now trust it more, because I would not have done that a year ago. And it just happened. I mean, I just realized it after, right? I didn't think about it, right? But when you said that, that came to my mind. I was like, wait, I just did this yesterday, and I did not double check what the AI did. Which,
which is incredible.
And
right?
it's probably the biggest decision I made in the last year. So source code is great, right? This is money. I mean, this is real stuff, right? So and I only thought about it because you mentioned it now. I didn't realize while doing it, which is even more scary. But anyway.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I left the Pentagon January of last year, and until that day, I had never used ChatGPT, not once. I had not used it, not even once. And now I'm out of the Pentagon, and it's a whole new world, and I'm using it for so much stuff and relying on it for so much stuff that it's very extraordinary. When you're in this environment where you just don't have access. I guess you do it now, but at that time there wasn't as much access. You don't really even think about using it. And now it's just in a year, how much has changed?
But you know why it's so dangerous, right? This is why the bubble in the Pentagon is so dangerous, right? They don't even know they're behind, right? Because that's all they know, And
I'm a
I brought
living
them to
example of it.
SpaceX, right? And I told them, I said, if I leave you there 2 weeks, your brain is going to implode. You cannot comprehend the velocity of SpaceX for 2 weeks. You would not be able to take it, right? And it's true, they wouldn't, and they don't know what normal is. It's a bubble. It's a self-sustained bubble, which is very dangerous for innovation, very dangerous for progress, and that's why we're getting 20 years behind.
I do think to some of these earlier points that I think the department will have no choice but to adopt it, but I also do think we sometimes in our head overhype how difficult it is to use. I think part of the hindrance to adoption was, Farouk, even when you were at the Pentagon, like I bet you didn't have an AI tool at your disposal to make use of. So why would you? And so I think especially with some of the department leadership and SecWars leadership around, AI enabled procurement and acquisition, pushes for things like other, AI across the procurement landscape for commercial first and pulling in all these commercial innovations into the federal government. I think all of those are already going to start to push the tide. And I think Elon Musk had a saying about electric vehicles that was, for electric vehicles to win out, they can't just be like 1x better, they can't be 2x better. It needs to actually, and it can't just be you're doing it because it's like a nice thing to do. It actually needs to be like 10x better. Like it just needs to make your experience fundamentally 10x better. And so I think for acquisition professionals to really pick it up, I think we'll have to put it in front of them. And then I think some of the onus is on industry and those developing the capabilities in partnership with government to create that 10x better solution. Now, I think that's naturally going to happen because I think this technology is absolutely transformational and it's going to be 10x better. And so I think will, as an acquisition professional, I think you will have a opportunity to 10x your impact. You can manage much more impactful programs. You can manage a greater scope of programs. Like you can just deliver. And I think the value will be there that it'll be easy to use and you'll have no choice but to use it because you're like, man, this makes my life, I want to use this because it makes my life so much better.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're coming up against the clock, so I'm going to ask one question to all of you, and if there's time, I'll ask a follow-up to it. At the beginning of the panel, we looked at what AI can help with right now. Now, I'm asking you a hypothetical. It's if we're in the year 2030, where do you see AI in market research? And if you want to go a little broader than market research in your answer, that's totally fine. I'll start with you, Nicholas.
Well, I don't know if there's a way to do market research without AI, honestly. I was looking for a doctor for my wife. I was looking, for anything I look for. I find, a million more results than when I look myself on Google, and I'm not bad at searching, right? So, I mean, it's just insane now with agents. And, I had my agent build a advanced web capability using Playwright. And so it's an open source project. And so it's able to act like a human and go search the web and, behave like that. And so he was able to go and pull all the results for me and, gave it keys to YouTube and whatever way so you can do research and transcription of video. And I mean, it's just insane, right? That he walked me through like how to create the API keys and give it the keys to be able to do its thing. And he was able to deploy the browser and do all that, in my container by itself, right? And it works, right? And so, for research, I think it's going to change everything we know to a degree that is, I have it do cron job every night to monitor my dark web. If people talk about me on the dark web, whatever, right, security stuff, right? Delete me, removing stuff about me on the web or whatever, right? So it does this by itself every night. It's just mind-boggling. So anyway, I'm excited. And
thank you. I'm gonna flip the question a little bit for Justin and Nick because we don't have much time left. But I really want to get a couple perspectives on this. If you had an opportunity to brief somebody on the Armed Services Committee on this topic for House or Senate, could you come up with a couple of ideas of what you would share to help promote the use of AI for market research?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go, Justin and then Nick.
Yeah. So I would say, I'm kind of stealing from Nicholas here, but this continuous feedback loop is what I'm hearing, right? So AI can both help drive technology and it can help us synthesize what technology we need because they're both moving out at really quick paces. So I would say trying to harness that in some meaningful way to drive, requirements, maybe into AI, have some of that research happen within the AI sphere to influence technology, and then pair those things. That's probably where I would go first. That would be my 2 cents. Over.
Great. Nick?
Yeah, I would just emphasize commercial first, frankly, because I just think there's so much low-hanging fruit with AI, right? Like Farouk, to go back to your point even earlier, right? Like you hadn't seen ChatGPT when you were like in the Pentagon, even like just about a year ago. Like there's so much low-hanging fruit just to like get these commercial technologies directly into people's hands, whether that's existing off-the-shelf models or, you know, these big data market research aggregation tools like Prism. Like you've got this already off the let's not try and recreate the wheel, go through a ton of, you know, hoops and hurdles. Let's just get this into people's hands faster. Because we could go through, you know, each and every single step and take our time and prototype and build something up. But I just think the reality is, I think it was Nicholas said off the bat, and I would like to echo, like, unfortunately, like, I do think conflict is already at our doorstep. Like conflict is on the horizon, and I'm a big believer in strength for deterrence. And like the time is now to operate with a wartime mindset. And so we need to move quickly. We need to get AI into the right hands so that we can do market research faster, we can do acquisition faster, and then vice versa, we can get the best technologies from industry into the hands of the warfighter and into the hands of our operators. And so I would just emphasize, like, let's just use what's there off the shelf commercially. Let's get into people's hands and let's get using it ASAP.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicholas, Justin, Nick. Awesome panel. Great free-flowing discussion. I am going to give the last word to the executive director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute, my good friend, Arun Serafin. Arun, thanks for bringing us all together.
Hey, thanks, Farouk, and all our panelists for such a great discussion. It was shocking to hear Nick Shalon say we should blow up the system, but he actually said that, huh? But, yeah, I want to also thank our great partners at MITRE for helping put together this session. I guess from my perspective, I loved the last couple of hours. It was great. We heard about this range of benefits that these tools can be used to provide to contracting officers, program managers, acquisition teams as a whole. One, to deal with all the various mandates coming down from clever people on the Hill or in the Pentagon itself, but also just to deal with the data that everyone's going to be swimming in and is currently swimming in, and AI generated proposals even. And I guess, you know, the other thing that was nice about the way this was done is some of the demos show, hopefully, people, this is real. We're not talking about the future. These aren't S&T projects. These are commercially available services that the Pentagon just needs to get itself to buy and use. You guys were great about pointing out some of the challenges, though. For example, data. You know, we need to do a better job of making use of all the public data that's out there and actually applying it to some of these challenges, and then getting past our traditional, we don't share our data or we overly classify our data so the tools aren't useful. I appreciate you guys touching on that. And as well as touching on, there's an imperative. The workforce needs to be trained and it needs to get the tools in place and the IT systems in place that can handle the tools to make use of all this. So I really appreciate that. I guess I'll close by, I was fascinated. You guys seem to be hinting at a future of AI versus AI combat in the acquisition space. That's a really interesting and scary thought. It's actually something that I think Ryan and Adam and Kevin and Wilson from my side are thinking about, and actually, hopefully we can explore that in the future a little more. But it may actually be a place where you guys can put your heads together and think about me and my old cubicle in the SASC and tell me if there's anything we could do to sort of start steering this conversation about the appropriate use of AI in these kinds of AI versus AI combat on the acquisition side. So with that, I just want to say again, thank you to all you guys for this great discussion. And then I want to run a few commercials and highlight a few upcoming events for NDIA. We are continuing our digital transformation for acquisition series. The next session will be on February 25th. From 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. It's going to spotlight existing industry tools and digital methods to improve acquisition outcomes. The final webinar in that series is going to be on March 18th from 1 to 2 p.m. It's going to feature Dr. Will Roper, who's the CEO of Astari, in a fireside chat. To register for these and other ETI events, please visit www.ndia.org/events. If you have feedback on this event or any of our events, please email us at eti@ndia.org. Thanks again to the panelists and the organizers. Thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.